next up, we're going to learn about an extreme effort that's happening. Our speaker is Helen Rowe, and her presentation is assessing the extinction risk of Sonoran Desert plants, IUCN SSC Sonoran Desert Plant Species Specialist Group. And so Helen holds a split appointment as an associate research professor at the School of Earth and Sustainability at Northern Arizona University and a director of the Parsons Field Institute with the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy in Scottsdale, Arizona. She engages citizen scientists, research partners, and students to improve ecological restoration and invasive species management techniques in arid environments, and to conduct long-term monitoring to detect changes caused by urbanization and climate change. She also co-chairs the Sonoran Desert Plant Species Specialist Group with IUCN, that stands for the International Union of the Conservation of Nature. This group is responsible for assessing the extinction risk of the almost 4,000 plant species in the Sonoran Desert and initiating conservation planning for the most threatened species. So thank you very much, Helen, for joining us. I believe we can see your slides, and you're welcome to begin. Just need to unmute. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you, and thank you for the introduction, Lisa. So I'm going to be talking to you today about this effort. I'd like to first acknowledge my collaborators on this work, some citizen scientists, Mike Wunsch and Dan Gruber of the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, and also Linda Howard, who is a PhD student at Arizona State University, and also our Red List authority for the red listing process. I'd also like to thank NAU and the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy for their support on this project. So the mission of IUCN as a whole is to influence, encourage, and assist societies to conserve the integrity and diversity of nature and ensure any use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically sustainable. So founded in 1948, IUCN is the world's largest global environmental organization and has a seat at the UN General Assembly. There are different programs within this large environmental organization, including the Green List, the Red List of ecosystems, the KBA for key biodiversity areas, and what it's commonly known for, which is the Red List. There's also a new metric called the STAR, the Species Threat Abatement and Restoration Initiative, that can help with prioritizing actions that would help abate threats.
You're pausing a bit, so you may want to stop your video share just so we can be sure to hear you clearly.
So the Red List is a critical indicator of the health of the world's biodiversity. Far more than a list of species and their status, it is a powerful tool to inform and catalyze action for biodiversity conservation and policy change, critical to protecting the natural resources we need to survive. These three species shown here are examples of conservation successes in which IUCN has worked with local partners to help conservation and recovery efforts on the ground. Established in 1964, the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List of threatened species has evolved to become the world's most comprehensive information source on the global extinction risk status of animal, fungus, and plant species. It's a standardized scientific process that we apply systematically across all species to assess their status. Here's how it works. We gather information on these relevant fields in the blue box, and then we apply numerical thresholds associated with the 5 criteria in the middle to categorize its status. including these threatened categories on the right and those seen on the previous slide, like least concern or data deficient. So just a little background on why we started this species specialist group. We want to be able to better understand our plant species and also fill that gap more widely across the Sonoran Desert. Through assessments, we can systematically understand the status of plant species and move on to conservation planning and action on a regional scale. IUCN provides the tools and guidance to be able to do that. Creates a baseline assessment of status of plants and helps identify the plant species at risk and can become a basis for regional conservation planning and action. The assessment begins with data compilation, seen on the left. In our case, the Sonoran plants is screening species using an automated process developed by our partner at New Mexico Biopark, Clay Meredith. Our students at NAU then filter through this information and flag the species that are possibly threatened. For threatened species, additional literature review is done to properly craft a draft assessment using the most up-to-date data available. Assessments are then reviewed by relevant specialists. This can be done remotely, either a review of an individual draft through email or in person in an assessment workshop. Assessment workshops aim to bring together relevant experts on a thematic group of species, either a species from a given area or taxonomic groupings, and review many species over the course of several days. These workshops are difficult to coordinate and often expensive, but they produce high-quality assessments. These then lead to are entered into SIS, which is IUCN's data repository, for species assessments. And then they go into, prior to publication, the Red List unit does consistency checks and then is published on the website. So we're at the data compilation stage. And we are working, again, back to this blue box. We have students been engaging with the first step in the process, checking or adding information for each of the fields in the blue box. And then this information, using this information for assessing the status. We found that the most difficult field to fill was the threats category. And so for this, we started developing a threats map. Here's just a picture of our threats map, but we've developed this ArcGIS online tool in which we have finished adding layers here to the easily mappable, that is spatial threats, but we're still missing a couple of layers in Mexico, although we're close. We are just starting to use it now to supplement what we can find in the literature. So we started our assessments with using, with Fabaceae. They're nitrogen fixers. They provide excellent nectar for pollinators, and they also are, one of the larger families with some economic importance for cultivation, grazing, and medicinal uses. So they're a big family, and there's lots to choose from and love in that family. So we sent these through the pipeline, and we came out with 22 species that were least concerned, 59 that were flagged. And so then the students have been sorting through those. And so added, out of these 59 flagged, they added 33 that were least concerned and 26 that are possibly threatened. So I'm going to go through a little bit about these and show what little information we have to go on at this point. My students picked 3 each out of their possibly threatened categories. And I'll be interested to know if there's any of you out there who know more about these species and will be able to provide some more information to me later on. But so here's Marina evanescens, and this is the first one we added the threats map to. So it's listed as both an annual and perennial herb, and is native to Baja California and Sonora. And so these 2 you'll see on each slide. AOO is a IUCN term for area of occupancy, and then and so that's sort of a gridded approach of how many grid cells the specimen is found in. And then EOO is the extent of occurrence. So that's basically drawing a big circle around all the points we can find. And so the AOO is always smaller. But this is a quite small area, and we don't know much about the use and trade, population trends. And then initially we didn't know much about threats either, but through the maps, the threats map, we know there's roads in the area, agricultural crops, cultivated grasslands, mining, and urban construction. No conservation measures were found in place, and so we're still have it as possibly threatened at this point. Marina calicosa, San Pedro false prairie flower, is a perennial herb. Again, it's got a small AOO, but quite substantial EOO. It's found in slightly higher elevations. These are in meters. And so it's found in southwestern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico, Sonora, and Chihuahua. And so there's not much known about population trades or use and trade, but it does have a very small number of occurrences. And so we don't know if it's just rare or if it is possibly threatened. It is listed by Nature Service G3, vulnerable globally, and S3 in Arizona. And so we have this still as possibly threatened species. So Pacita mullis, fish poison tree. So it's found around 115 meters. And its habitat is described as sinaloa and thorn scrub. And then it also goes up in elevation from there and can be found in different habitats. Again, it's got a small EOO and a larger AOO. It's found in Baja Peninsula, Sonora, Hermosillo, and Los Mochis, Mexico, so mostly south of the border. And the species appears to have all remains within below 600 meters. So this tree is named after the use of poisoning fish. So I'm not sure how much that's used these days. Population trends and threats, conservation status are all not found. And so this is remains in a possibly threatened category. The Leotant Gentry's indigo bush is found in canyons and is on rocky hillsides also. It's got a much larger EOO and then a very small AOO. And it's vulnerable to livestock grazing, and we did find records that population is decreasing. And we did find threats to this species, including seasonal flooding, habitat degradation, trampling, And so I think one of the conservation suggestions was fence maintenance to sort of keep out the grazing by livestock. And so this one is critically imperiled as a G1 and as state status as S1 as well. And so we have this also as possibly threatened. We have Sonoran Indigo here, and this species is found in meadows, slopes, and pine, and with elevations which are quite a bit higher. Species is documented as a perennial and can be viney. So the AOO is quite low, and the EOO again is larger. Not much known about use and trade, threats, or population trends. Global status is apparently secure with a G4 with no state rank. But given the small AOO, we would still list this as possibly threatened ourselves. However, the EOO is quite large, so maybe there's a lot more points out there that we don't know about. So bright sweet pea, Atherosclera, sorry for butchering names. Habitat and ecology, so these are found on meadows, slopes, and pine forest. Quite small AOO, but not the smallest. Not much known about population trends, threats, or use and trade. And again, this one's apparently secure species, but critically imperiled in Nevada, but no other state status rank. We have that listed as possibly threatened. Now we have Santa Catalina prairie clover with a habitat and ecology. It subsists on perennial subshrub on rocky hill slopes and oak forest. Distribution is in Arizona and northwestern Mexico and New Mexico. It's got a AOO in the low 200s, but quite a large EOO. Not much known here. It's listed as vulnerable by NatureServe and vulnerable also in Arizona and New Mexico. So we have that one listed again as possibly threatened at this point. And
Helen, I just want to let you know we've got about a minute left of your allotted time, but we can do the Q&As during the break that's scheduled after this. But I know people are eager to learn what species you need to know more about. So we'll let you go through the rest of your slides, and we'll just plan to do Q&A during the break.
Thank you for the update. It looks like I have a few more slides here. I can rush through what these are and then get to my final slides real quick here. So no problem. So Marin Steerweed, again, that's a small EOO. Cusp clover, Trifolium wormulski. And so again, this one has a small EOO, but quite a very large EOO. So this one might not be possibly threatened, but we still have to do some hunting around. So that really brings us to the next step in our process, which is this assessment review, in which we hope to hold a workshop, probably online, of expert reviewers. So at these, we hope to bring together people sufficiently familiar with the species and someone with experience applying the Red List categories and criteria. And often having a group with wide range is very useful. And so then they go into the Red List as a peer-reviewed journal article, and we review, through that review process, we review the range maps. And I want to point out at that point, sometimes we're able to, through those workshops, learn more about the distribution of the species and get points from experts that we didn't know about. So if you look at this scribble, this is an example from a workshop where they're like, no, this is not where this one exists. And no, not here, not here, not here. Those are some other different species, or they were described differently. So then you're left with just this smaller place. And so then you fix those AOOs and EOOs that are based on these distribution points. And so that's one of the really valuable things about the expert workshops. I also review the narrative sections, any other associated data, and reviews can take between 10 minutes and an hour in a workshop. And so that's my last slide. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if anyone's interested in this review process, I'd love to have people who are familiar with these species join us. So if we do have time for questions, we can open that up now. You can let us know about that, Lisa.
Yeah, we're in our break time, but audience members, you're welcome to step away if you'd like. And if not, we will go with questions for the next couple minutes. There were a few that came in. So number one is how, and I'm apologize, I'm keeping my video off because I got a message now that my internet is unstable. So okay. How does the process start if data is lacking for species?
How does the process start?
Yeah, like how do you even begin if data is lacking on some species?
Well, as you see, we are lacking in data for a lot of these. The students, I give them, a lot of different resources where they need to go to look up this information. But as probably many in the audience know, for some species, it's just not there. And so there is a category called data deficient. And so we can go to that, but we try not to. So what we do is we just get everything we can. And the point of the students sort of drafting this information and trying to get everything they can is really then to go to an expert workshop and say, who's got points? What else do you know about where this species might be? Or maybe even some of these points, as you saw on that messy map, might not even be that species. And so if at that workshop we still don't have data, then it's got to be data deficient. But then that is helpful too for sort of honing in what kind of research is needed. And so by doing this sort of systematically, we're getting to species that people might not have thought about. I mean, I think some of those species may fall into those categories, or maybe there's some hidden gems out there, which often happens. One quick point is Desert Botanical Garden is leading the cactus and succulent species specialist group. And so they have done, they finished the cactus assessments. And so I know from them that they have gotten a lot of points this way through expert workshops and just through people's personal databases.
Okay. We do have a few more questions. We're almost at the time for our next speaker, but I would love for us to get to the questions, especially since you're seeking help. So I'm going to do a change to our schedule. We'll start John Schuring's presentation more so around 8:10. So we'll give this another 5 minutes. So again, if you want to take a break in the audience, you're welcome to, but we're going to try to get through the rest of the questions. So next question, can you give us some idea of the kinds of threats that species are facing? Are there some threats that are hard to map on a GIS layer?
Yeah, and that's sort of understood. I mean, we're not mapping, climate change or actual land use change, although, you can get updated maps on land use. We can, and actually, Lisa, as you know, I've worked a lot with invasive species, but we know they're not very well mapped. And so that's a layer that we know, even if we got some, we know that it wasn't very accurate. And so that's a big one, invasive species, even though it is mappable. And then like nitrogen deposition, there's a little bit of that could be modeled onto a map. That might be sort of a future direction for this. But in terms of the common things that you can see is just urbanization, roads. We have solar plants on there. We've got mines. Mines are everywhere. Blew my mind how many mines there are. Things like that. I think, covered a lot of those just spatial.
Okay. We have two more questions. The first one, are low densities, few populations, or low absolute numbers considered intrinsic threats?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a difference between just a rare plant and a one that's declining in numbers. So when you go to the criteria and categories, there is some help with sort of differentiating between just rarity and pairing that with whether there's declines happening or not. But at the end of the day, basically, if there's a limited population and there's threats, that's going to be in the threatened categories.
Okay. And then lastly, how can one look up the red list status for a particular plant?
It's pretty easy to just kind of Google your way into those on the IUCN Red List. Each one has kind of the published sheet if it's found. What I can do is during after my session and John Shearings, I could just slip that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great, the website, and then people can browse around hopefully later. But yeah, have that link to see, and we'll include that when we post this video to our YouTube page. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And hopefully you'll hear from many people in the audience today offering to help with this initiative. So thank you.